Responsibilities with City Council Person Jamie Torres as our speaker. Before we move into the voter education part of this briefing, I want to let you all know that program, capital P, in the League of Women Voters is also the arm of our organization that is involved in advocacy. And one of the current advocacy endeavors that we are really making a push toward, both at a state level and local leagues of women voters in various counties, is for Initiative 89. Initiative 89 is an effort to get on the ballot in November of 2024 a proposal to place in our state constitution language that will enshrine women's access to the full range of reproductive health care, including abortion. If you have not yet signed a petition to support Initiative 89 getting on that ballot, you can contact the League office. I am a trained petition circulator, and we did 2 trainings for the League of Women Voters of Denver. So we have lots of people that can come to your house, to your book club, to your Pilates class, to your neighborhood, to your building, to get signatures for that petition to get Initiative 89 on the ballot in November. We are endeavoring to collect statewide 184,000 signatures, valid signatures from registered voters in Colorado, so that we have an ample number to get that initiative on the ballot. So that was my plug for the advocacy side of program. Councilperson Torres will address issues related to how Denver residents can attain or retain affordable housing at a time of increasing costs and a significant unhoused population, which now includes newcomers who have migrated to the U.S. seeking asylum. Our city council has endeavored to address these issues, and we want to welcome our city council president to speak with us tonight. League of Women Voters briefings, whether in person or virtual, are always open to the public and free of charge. Tonight's briefing will be recorded and will include the speaker's slides, if she has any, and it will be available on our website, lwvdenver.org, within about 2 to 3 days. The League of Women Voters, both nationally and locally, has advocated to enact social policy to provide for basic human needs, including programs to provide a decent home and suitable living environment for every individual and family. In Denver, housing has concerned the League since the 1930s. Studies led to our taking positions on the provision and standards of affordable housing. The League's impact on issues, our national guide to policy positions, states, quote, that the federal government should assure that our economic system is functioning to produce and maintain sufficient decent housing for people at all income levels, and give a variety of incentives to local jurisdictions to encourage them to provide housing for low and moderate income groups. It also includes that, quote, state and local governments should establish effective agencies to aid, promote, coordinate, and supplement the federal housing programs and the private sector. We will mute attendees while Congressperson Torres presents her information.
Councilperson.
Pardon me?
Council.
You said
You gave me a promotion.
you said Congressperson, Susan, instead of councilperson.
Oh, sorry, Councilperson Torres. Pardon me for the, people of my age do make gaffes, and we're still competent to be leaders in our society. We will mute attendees while Councilperson Torres presents her information. Please put your comments and questions in the chat. I've heard from Cindy Sestrich that the council person likes interactive kinds of question and answer. So we will provide time for in-person as well as your questions from chat. Pearl Ann Zalarny will pose questions from chat to council person Torres. Did I say it right that time? Before I
Unfortunately,
hand off.
Sue, I'm sorry, but Perlam will not be attending this evening. She's working.
Oh, okay. Okay, I will be posing questions from chat. Before I hand off to Cindy Sestrich, who will formally introduce Councilperson Torres, I want to remind you that our next briefing will be on Tuesday, March 19th. Please note that this briefing will start at 5 o'clock, not at 5:30, because we will be showing the documentary film Healing US Us, and Diane Dunn, who is from the Colorado Foundation for Universal Healthcare, will be our discussion facilitator. We need to expand the time to accommodate that film and discussion. We'll open the Zoom early and encourage attendees to link in at 5 o'clock. Without further ado, I'm going to hand off to Cindy Sestrich.
Well, I don't know, Councilperson Torres. Maybe Sue just made a prediction of what your future holds. But Councilperson Torres is in her second term for City Council. She came in with a bang, I think. She is very dedicated to her constituency. And she came with a great deal of background. We have published on our website and in our voter as to all of her background in housing and migrant issues. She also was a board member of the Denver Housing Authority. So Jamie is passionate. She has found ways of keeping people in their houses in her district, work with the entire city. And I think Jamie is one that you should watch. Her passion, her dedication, and her long residency in Denver, I think, lead her to be a very good leader and someone that we can ask questions of. So Jamie, if you would please start in, and if you want us to ask questions during the time, just let us know.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
I'm so appreciative to see you all again. And over Zoom is just fine. I know we'd all prefer to be in the same room together, but I just love that we're able to do this, seeing all your backgrounds from your living rooms or your cozy places at home. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. I am Jamie Torres. I represent West Denver District 3. And so my district goes from the southern street of Sloan's Lake and just over the football stadium, all the way south to Florida, down Federal Boulevard, and then east down 6th Avenue to where Denver Health is. So it's a big L shape of the city, and a district where so much is happening, particularly
Jamie, you'll have
Jamie.
to.
I got it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I got it.
All right.
My fault.
No, that's okay. One of the biggest reasons that I ran for city council was because of the deep concern that I had around impacts of gentrification on my district, and how that would manifest in losing a lot of residents who lived here, who might not be able to stay, who might not be able to continue to afford to live in Denver, period, much less West Denver. And so some of those things really started to become really important for me to play a role in developing policy around, but also to learn how we can start to move the needle on things. Gentrification can feel like an overwhelming factor when you think about all of the things that weigh in on the affordability of your community, the desirability of your community. And so needing to really understand a lot more, not just about zoning, but also financial stacking, how we determine where low-income projects, housing projects might find locations to operate in Denver, how we were trying to address homelessness in the city. All these things really started to come to the surface for me in making this decision to run for council. I ran for council in 2019, not knowing a year later we would all be sent home to experience a pandemic together and try to figure out what then that would do to our city. And certainly for West Denver, I saw it deepening and exposing a lot of the vulnerabilities the community already had when it comes to self-sufficiency, to economic stability, to job access, to healthcare access. All of these things really just kind of were exposed for West Denver. We ended up being a community with the most COVID incidents, the most death from the pandemic. And we were largely essential workers. We were also more likely not to have preventative or any kind of health coverage. So a lot of those things just became voluminous in West Denver. So some of the things that I wanted to share with you, and I appreciate the prompt questions, and also invite hands raised if you have a question about anything that I talk about. I've also got links to things that I can put in the chat if you want to look up some of the detail on your own time. But some of the things that we wanted to kind of share with you were some of the issues that we've been trying to solve. And it's been interesting kind of seeing how these manifest. So it isn't just being able to afford rent or be able to afford your property taxes. It's so layered across the city. One of the things that took place even before I came into council, this was spearheaded by former councilwoman at large, Councilwoman Kinich. She made it unlawful, a form of discrimination, to decline a renter because of how they were going to pay their rent. And what this was in direct response to was somebody had to find an apartment or a home to rent with their Section 8 voucher. So they had a voucher from Denver Housing Authority, and they found a house that fell within their the rental qualification that they needed, but they were rejected because somebody didn't want to work with Denver Housing Authority. That became a form of discrimination, of income discrimination. And so he created that probably around 2018 or so and couched it within the Anti-Discrimination Office Ordinance. So that was one of the first things that I saw even before coming to council in terms of what are the ways that Denver can help protect residents and make sure that they have the options that they need, the affordability that they need. I was on the Denver Housing Authority board, as you heard before, and we were often hearing about Denver residents who got vouchers who had to go to other communities because they couldn't find a home locally. And we were hearing about that constantly because you can move with your voucher. And so that was one of the ways that I know she was looking at how do we try to prevent that here in Denver. Not long ago, actually, the Office of Housing Stability was created in the city. One of its sources of funding is paid for through a sales tax. And this funds homelessness resolution. And so that's to a tune of about $30 to $45 million a year, depending on kind of how much sales tax is collected. That goes directly into the various ways that the city tries to address homelessness. There's another thing called a linkage fee. And so if you're a developer, we just changed the rules recently, but if you build fewer than 10 units in your development, you're obligated to pay a linkage fee, which is a fee for every kind of square footage that you've got in your units. If you may build more than 10 units, 10% of those are required to be affordable. And so that's how the expanding housing affordability policy is impacting future development in either one, trying to fund the housing affordability fund, or two, trying to actually put affordable units on the street. And that was something that was built not very long ago, but it was deepened maybe 2 years ago by Denver City Council. So we have a greater linkage fee that's applied, and we have a greater affordability that's applied. And so that went under reform relatively recently by Denver City Council. I just had a meeting today. Actually, scratch that. This was one of our rezonings last night, where the applicant was going to have to scrap their development because they weren't going to be able to both build any affordable units and get the kind of the economic that they needed out of their development. So they were going to scratch it entirely because they were limited in terms of the number of floors that they were able to build on. So they came back after expanding housing affordability policy was passed and said, okay, now EHA says if we can increase by, say, 2 floors on our development, and we will build more affordable units. And it actually worked out and brought the project back to life. And they were back with the property owner and support from the neighborhood associations, really doing the work to demonstrate that EHA was actually working. And so that was one of the first times I was starting to see some really good feedback about this expanding housing affordability policy. In my district, and this started well before me, Denver Housing Authority and the Office of Economic Development got together and put some funds together to create what is called West Denver Renaissance Collaborative, WDRC. And WDRC was doing a couple different things. They were focused on West Denver, obviously. They were looking at how do we increase neighbor intelligence and knowledge about what the development community is doing, how zoning works, what decisions might get made that might affect whether a single family home gets built across the street, a duplex or a triplex or an apartment building. How are all those factors determined? So really just trying to increase the knowledge base of neighbors in West Denver and create real ambassadors who are part of city conversations, knowing that so much work was going to be coming, so many different kinds of developments and projects were going to be coming in West Denver. WDRC also started what then was pretty innovative. It was a real pivot around accessory dwelling units. And West Denver didn't really have a lot of these. I know in Northwest Denver, in Councilwoman Sandoval's district, she has homes all over the place that have carriage houses, mother-in-law apartments, even tandem or basement apartments. We have some of those, but they're not very prolific in West Denver. What WDRC began an ADU, I'm be using a ton of acronyms, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to say them out loud because they're a little hard to track. West Denver Renaissance created this accessory dwelling unit program where they would fund $25,000 to help you build your accessory dwelling unit on your property if you made it affordable for 25 years. So you promised if you were going to rent it, you would rent it to somebody who made 80% area median income or higher. So they were starting to get some takers, but what became difficult for them was that not everybody had the zoning to actually build an accessory dwelling unit. And so I came in 2019 and we started working on a really broad rezoning application. And I ended up rezoning all of the Villa Park neighborhood, the Barnum neighborhood, and the Barnum West neighborhood to allow for accessory dwelling units everywhere that they could be allowed. So this was on single family zoned lots, and they had enough room for an additional unit to be built. And just to give you a sense of the scale, this affected my own home. I live on a 6,400 square foot lot. My home is 900 square feet. And so I have yard upon yard upon yard, right? And my dog loves it, but it is a huge waste of space in a city like Denver, where one, we need housing, and two, a lot of our families are living doubled up in homes. A lot of our community are desperately trying to keep their kids with them. or even trying to bring their parents back home and try to find a space for them. So we were trying to meet a variety of needs. What's been great about the ADU program is that it's grown because it's been shown to be very effective, and it just had huge successes. So we were able to get funding approved to expand the program, so more homes could be approved. We increased the AMI, the area median income, to qualify for these. And with the new zoning, people automatically qualified. They didn't have to go and apply for their own zoning for their lot. The additional thing is that now the governor is a huge fan of accessory dwelling units. And so last year, the legislature tried to run a land use bill that was incredibly big. One of the components was trying to give everybody entitlement across the state to build accessory dwelling units. That failed, but because of a variety of different reasons. There is a new singular ADU bill that's going to be proposed in the legislature that gives that authority for anyone with a single family home zone lot that has the local permission, the ability to build an accessory dwelling unit. And so these are what I've seen come up in West Denver. I've seen studios all the way up to 3-bedroom accessory dwelling units built on the property. And the really cool thing about West Denver Renaissance is that they work exclusively with Habitat for Humanity to build. They also work exclusively with one financial organization to provide the mortgage or the financing for the entity. And then they're able to layer on city and state funding to help the construction. And we've just seen these really do the exact thing that we've been hoping for. Folks are applying to build for their kids who can't find anywhere else to live in Denver, their parents. Some of the primary homeowners are moving to the ADU themselves and then renting out their primary home. And you can only rent out to long-term rentals. If you are Airbnb-ing the location, you've got to live on the property and you've got to be living there even when you construct it. So there's a variety of things that we're trying to safeguard against both units becoming short-term rental locations. So a few things happening there, but that has been one of the real amazing successes that we've seen, not just kind of start in West Denver, but definitely expand out throughout the rest of the city. One of the other things that's come up big that started in District 3 was how we preserve and really protect our mobile home park. We have 5 in Denver right now. The one that I have in my district had tried to replace old mobile home units with new mobile home units several years back, about 10 years ago. And they were told by the city, you cannot do that. It's actually against our zoning code to replace an old mobile home unit with a new one. They sued the city. The city then opted into an agreement with them that within the next 10 years, they would try to address this problem. They never did. I came in 2019 and the owner of the mobile home park downloaded with me for almost an hour the history behind the Capital City mobile home park. I sat and listened to residents who were trying to improve their housing unit, their mobile home unit, and they couldn't. There were new units that this property owner had bought that he couldn't even fill with occupants because the city wouldn't let them. So the city has no zoning language that talks about what's the standard for a mobile home park or unit. It just doesn't exist in the city's zoning code. And the only language in there was you can't replace an old unit with a new unit. So there were a couple things that I had to do in order to start to get into this work, because what we've seen nationally is the purchase of mobile home parks and then the turnover and displacement of all residents in order to build something else on that property. And so we were intensely worried about displacement of residents. My mobile home park has 78 units on it. It is an incredibly packed property. And a lot of these residents have lived in this mobile home park for 30 or 40 years. They've been raising their kids there. It is a community. They're incredibly bonded to one another. And so to be able to try to figure out a path for them, to have some stability and some permanence became really important for me to try to figure out. At the time that we started this work, it was in the prior council. So Councilman Jolan Clark, Councilwoman Candy Sedevaca, and myself worked together because all 5 parks were in our districts, and started a working group. The first thing we did was a moratorium. So we passed a bill that said nobody can redevelop any of these lots for the next year and a half while we are working on this problem. What we didn't want to see was that some of the attention that we were now paying to mobile home parks would start materializing in those owners getting rid of those assets and trying to redevelop them underneath what we were doing. And so we put a moratorium out there for 18 months so that we could start having this conversation very publicly about trying to save these parks. And they're home to about over 300 families citywide. So the moratorium, then we passed a zoning change that now allowed you to replace an old unit with a new unit. We knew that was going to start kickstarting other conversations about being able to replace an old unit. Also meant you were going to probably trigger some building and fire code, which meant the distance between your unit and the unit next to you had to be a certain distance so that you were trying to protect a little bit against fire spread. So now we're creating the district standards in the zoning code for how these mobile home parks can actually exist. The other reason the zoning language becomes really important for mobile home parks is that my park is a perfect example. Residents came together, every single resident in that park agreed to form an entity, and they're buying their park from the current owner. So it is becoming a resident-owned community. And I get filled when I talk about that because these are residents that I look at as the very reason I ran. They are hardworking, Spanish speaking, elder, veteran, like you name it, they live in this community, and one of their biggest worries has been, am I going to lose my home, and where could I possibly move to in Denver that I can still afford? And so these were constantly the things that we were grappling with. They have stacked together $11 million from a variety of different sources in order to buy this park and operate it themselves. And so one of the things that's critical to demonstrating to the bank that's going to be loaning them a good portion of that money is that you actually have the zoning for this thing to exist legally in the city of Denver. And so being able to demonstrate that to the financial entity that's helping has been this work that we've been doing so far. So incredibly proud of the work that we've done thus far with mobile home parks. And one of the reasons it wasn't really approached before was this level of vulnerability. As soon as you start to open up the door for mobile home parks to start to change, you really do invite folks to make big, huge catalytic changes for these parks, and you lose the stability of all of the residents and where they can move to. So it had been something that nobody really wanted to address before because of that vulnerability. So we've been trying to do it very carefully. Temporary rental and utility assistance has been a really big topic for Denver City Council because we battled a little bit, even with our current Mayor Mike Johnston, to properly fund the TRUA fund. TRUA means temporary rental and utility assistance. We had to override his veto to fund that to the tune of $30 million for this year. You went to $30 million when it was originally, I think he promised to fund it at about 15 to 20 is I think where we landed in the budget, was because we were already reaching those numbers towards the end of 2023 and we ran out in November. We couldn't take any more applications at the beginning of November as people are getting into some of the coldest months of the year, for people to apply for rental and utility assistance. So we knew going into the next year, it was going to be even deeper. And for us, this is the upstream factor in trying to keep people from becoming homeless, that we knew that we needed to try to mitigate any loss there. And so while we're talking about his House 1,000 initiative and getting people off the street and into hotel rooms, congregate shelter, we also need to talk about the stream that feeds on-street homelessness, which is people losing the housing that they do have. And so really wanting to make sure that we had properly funded that became something that all of council really rallied around. And so we were able to get that fully funded to $30 million for this year, which was a big big increase and a big success that we saw. Let me pause there and see if, because I want to go into our migrant response and just see if there's any questions about housing. I could chat a little bit too about the mayor's homelessness initiative, some of what he did, if folks want to hear about that as well. But I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions.
So raise your hand, either your actual hand or in the reactions below where you have a virtual hand. If you have any questions you would like to pose to Councilperson Cindy.
I wondered if the rental assistance program, since rents are rising so high, is that becoming a corporate entitlement program? I mean, what percentage do we give of rent of these high-end corporate-owned buildings, multifamily buildings?
I was gonna look up exactly what we provide. It is for rental assistance, you've got to be behind or needing immediate assistance. And so it pays kind of the back rent that you might have been delinquent on, and maybe one more month ahead. When we had additional federal funds for this, we were able to pay many more months ahead for renters. You're right, though. I mean, a lot of my district, we were able to track since the recession how many homes turned over to corporate buyers, and it was a healthy percentage. We saw one of the zip codes in my district during the recession was number 4 in the country for foreclosure, and when those homes then got repurchased, nearly 40% of them were by corporate purchasers. And so when you hear about like Zillow or other entities buying homes, that absolutely is happening, and has happened, and it's hard to imagine those homes ever coming back on the market for owner occupied residency. So yes, absolutely. What we do find though is it's not your average professional who needs help paying their rental assistance. It's our families, it's low income families, it's single parents, it's grandparents taking care of kids who are really stretched in order to afford the rents that either they might get raised by or that are already kind of slim margins for them. So we contract with nonprofits who then work with each of those families, and so that's typically who we find coming through through those programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions? I wondered whether you got any pushback about increasing density, which the governor has also said we need to do statewide. Increasing density, which puts pressure on public transportation or on just increasing the numbers of automobiles on the road, which affects air quality. How do you negotiate that?
That's a great question. In the way that it comes up in my district, and the one thing that we've been working on for 3 years. We just passed it last spring, is the West Area Plan. And so something called the Neighborhood Planning Initiative is coming to every neighborhood in Denver. And it is the collection of neighborhoods that go through a planning effort together. So while historically we've had neighborhood plans, so every single individual neighborhood getting a plan, has resulted in kind of a very behind the ball community planning department, because not every neighborhood has them, and some of them are very old. I think one of my oldest ones was the early 80s for one of the Barnum neighborhoods. And so how can we plan around something, a reality of 40 years ago? So the neighborhood planning initiative took place for West Denver, for Sun Valley, West Colfax, Villa Park, Barnum, Barnum West, and Valverde. So a collection of West Denver neighborhoods. And what that asked community was, how does this community want to actually see development happen over the next 20 years? And so we built into that plan the corridors where we wanted heights, where we didn't want heights, and this is all taking into account, we live along the west light rail line between Villa Park and West Colfax, along I-25, along Federal Boulevard, Colfax. You have major corridors there as well. And neighbors really kind of invested a lot of time in looking at what makes sense for increasing density versus not. Now, the governor's last year attempt at a land use bill really tried to give density to everywhere that had single family home zoning, which is a lot of my district. This is an area of huge pushback. One, because Denver doesn't like being told by the state how to do land use. But two, that you get a lot of pushback from single family homeowners who say, I'm in a single family neighborhood. I want to live next to other single family homes. I don't want to live next to a duplex, a triplex, a quadruplex, things like that. So those are very real reactions that even my district had, but I saw a lot of my council members who were fielding that. What we tried to do with the West Area Plan was make sure that at a local level, we were very thoughtful about development along this corridor, development along these particular nodes of transit, along Colfax, because we know that these are where bus rapid transit might be coming, where light rail already is. And so being thoughtful about those things. But it was that immediate upzoning that was a little much harder, I think, for Denverites and probably other communities to latch onto. It definitely forced us to have a conversation, which I think we needed to have. When it comes to density, though, there is a climate and advantage to having a tall building rather than a lot of spread out homes, for how water gets used, for being able to electrify as opposed to rely on gas appliances, new construction. So a lot of those things were things that are very relevant for us. And frankly, West Denver had more people in each home back in my grandmother's day. More kids, larger families. I look at my home now, which probably raised 6 or 8 kids at one point, and it's just me and my husband. So, the amount of density that our neighborhoods actually could tolerate is actually a lot higher than it is right now. And you see that a little bit because we also have this conversation in my district around low enrollment in our elementary schools. And for me, it's a huge indicator of whether or not we have density that's going to sustain our community over time. At one time, when Denver Public Schools released their first list of schools with low enrollment in jeopardy of closure, every single 9 elementary schools in my district was on that list. So I've got 9 elementary schools that at that time, which was probably about 2017, I'm sorry, not 2017, about 2020, because I've only been in office since 19, about 2020, have been under enrolled. And so that is an indicator for me of the density of my community is actually a really interesting thing to think about. And it's not that entirely that families with kids are moving elsewhere. It's that we just don't have a lot of kids right now. And so it's just an interesting thing to think about when you think about units as opposed to families that occupy those units as well.
Thank you. Other questions? I think Councilperson Torres thought about moving on to talk about the impact on Denver of newcomers, migrants coming here, and I can't remember the other topic, but we'll let you move on to those other topics.
That sounds great. Yeah, after that, I think I have some legislation that I was going to share
Thank you.
that might be coming up as well. Excuse me. So I'll go back a little bit and let me give maybe just a little bit of context. Before I joined Denver City Council, I was in the Agency for Human Rights and Community Partnerships for 18 years. And that's here within the city. It's an agency that's been around since 1947. And just, it is my heart. I didn't, when I started working for that agency, I had no idea how much it would be a part of my growth as a human here in Denver, and as a professional in Denver. So I didn't expect to stay longer than 2 years, and I did end up staying for 18. But part of it was because I was able to create and direct the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And I started that in 2005. And this was at a time when we were able to start having a conversation about immigrant integration statewide. We were the recipient of one of the Colorado Trust grants that was called the Supporting Immigrant and Refugee Families Initiative, SURFI, and they funded 19 communities throughout the state of Colorado. Fast forward to about 2010, 2011, I joined a couple other, and I was the lone staff person, so this was an office of one. So I had to focus a lot on policy. I couldn't do a lot of direct service. The more bang for my buck was really being able to focus in on education and policy. So I was able to connect with national efforts to connect city offices that focused on immigrant integration or immigrant and refugee affairs, and learn from each other, share how we were responding to things. And that became a really pivotal force for me here in Denver as a lone staff person, because we were about to enter the Trump years in office, and how deeply and how quickly he moved to transform our immigration administration, funding, the numbers of refugees that we would as a country be resettling. It happened very quickly. Susan, were you going to mention something?
No, continue.
Oh,
I'm nodding my
okay.
head in agreement.
Oh, okay. And so it was necessary for us as a city to have had this jumping off point to have a conversation about why as a city do we care about immigrants and refugees before he took office. And so I really was grateful for the partnership, learning from San Francisco, Seattle, LA, Miami, New York, Houston, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, all of these wonderful cities who are sharing, here's how our city is affected, here's how we're responding, and doing it in a way that says we rely on this base, not just for the economics of our city, but for the labor for our city, for the cultural richness of our cities, and really be able to leverage one another's power in that way. And so we joined something called Cities for Action, with joined mayor's offices that were supportive of immigrant integration efforts. We just launched a number of kind of innovative things. When Trump took office, actually the day after he was elected, we were getting contacted in my office by our partners, and people really wondering, what does this mean and what do we have to prepare for? And come January, what we learned very quickly, there were 3 executive orders that were put in place very quickly that we had to respond to, and community that was afraid. And it ran the gamut, the whole spectrum of immigration statuses. This was not just about undocumented immigrants. This was also about documented immigrants, legal permanent residents, anybody who did not already have citizenship. And then it was also about, how do we welcome refugees? We had such a robust and growing refugee resettlement program under Obama, and it tanked. It went from probably 125,000 people that we would resettle as a country, down to less than 20,000, which meant our resettlement agencies were dwindling down in their capacity, because their funding is based on how many folks that we're able to resettle. There were a number of threats to cities. So through that year, we passed some legislation, both changing our municipal sentencing structure, to make sure that we weren't making people more vulnerable to deportation because maybe they violated a municipal violation. And this could be as simple as being in the park after hours, trespassing. You get a ticket, there's no jail time, there's no fine, but you had the potential of up to a year and the potential of up to $1,000. That was deportable if immigration really wanted to crack down on deportable offenses. So we were trying to make sure that we weren't making things worse for families. We started an immigrant legal services fund, so a defense fund that we fund as a city. We can also take donations from community, and it goes directly out to legal providers. Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Clinic, Lutheran Immigration Clinic, Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, Remain. They all get funding from the city to provide defense for if you're in deportation proceedings, but they can also provide affirmative relief, which means if I'm a legal permanent resident, I have a green card, and I've been here for 25 years, maybe I should become a citizen. So it finally gets me on that path of becoming a citizen. So all of those things were kind of happening within that first year. What's happening now, and I'll share what I shared with my council colleagues as well. Denver has long been called a sanctuary city. We have never called ourselves a sanctuary city. We've never passed an ordinance that said Denver is an official sanctuary city. One of the reasons we've never done that is that we could never guarantee sanctuary for somebody. So that being a misnomer for the kind of protection that Denver can provide was never really accurate. Churches have stepped in as sanctuary locations because they will do what they need to keep a family or an individual safe. In the city and county of Denver, Immigration and Customs Enforcement operates. They don't even have to tell us if they're operating in the city of Denver or if they're on the street looking for somebody, if they're in our courthouse looking for somebody who matches the description or the name of somebody that they're looking for. They operate and they have the authority to operate. So it was important for us not to give the false impression to residents that we can offer them sanctuary like that. What we are is welcoming. And what that means is we know that for hundreds of years, Denver has received people who come from different countries, who have been able to establish roots here, who have been able to build economies in Denver and throughout Colorado from different countries. And that's something that has helped build Denver. So in the way that we welcome, my husband's from Texas, I welcome him to Colorado, but we also welcome people from around the country and around the world into Denver. And that's built in my district, some of the most vibrant spaces that we've got. South Federal Boulevard everybody knows that's where you go when you want Vietnamese food, you want a bowl of pho, you want a banh mi. Morrison Road for enchiladas and mariscos. Like, it is an amazing space for that. One of the most incredible things that I didn't even know the full breadth of history was of the historic Jewish population in West Denver, and how they established themselves on Lower Colfax and West Colfax, and what took root when they found a community that welcomed them, that they could become business owners, pharmacists, community members, educators, and how dominant that still remains in West Colfax. And that's a huge source of pride. So we think about all the ways that Denver's been formed by immigration, and we can't separate ourselves from that experience fully. And so that was a lot of the reason for us talking about and really kind of realizing, what does it mean to be a welcoming city? So you get into then the politics of it. And Governor Abbott in Texas and Governor DeSantis in Florida deciding to make political theater out of migrants who are crossing the border. And we, the one that I'll never forget is Governor DeSantis sending planes of immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. Right. They chose Chicago, they chose New York, places that hit their radar as not only democratic leading cities, but also cities that have declared themselves welcoming to immigrants. And while they say sanctuary cities as though it's a dig at who Denver is, for me, we were selected because we are vocally and very publicly a welcoming city. We started to receive, it wasn't always buses. It wasn't buses in the very beginning. I remember hearing a family arrived at Denver International Airport, somehow made their way to Red Cross and were asking for help. They had no contact. They don't even know who put them on the plane, but they somehow ended up with a Red Cross address and made their way there from Denver International Airport. We saw folks just arriving at the Denver Rescue Mission in St. Francis Center, so our homeless shelters downtown. And we were really trying to figure out, where the heck did these folks come from? How did they end up here? Then one of the churches in Denver coordinated a bus of 50 people with a church in El Paso. And that was between those two institutions to be able to take one bus off their hands. It was around that time that Governor Abbott just started sending us busloads of folks. And they would drop off, not always in organized places. Sometimes it was the web building. Sometimes it was a human services building. It all random hours of the day and night. There was never any, and there still isn't any coordination to say expect this many people or buses or kids tomorrow and the next day after that. So Denver activated the Emergency Operations Center, which is really the basement of the city and county of Denver, which pulls in people from around city departments to help staff 24/7 an EOC, and a center that is trying to figure out, who did we receive, where do we need to send them. Denver Human Services just recently bought a bunch of cots just for emergency services. Okay, Denver Human Services, you're helping us lead this. Very much an emergency reaction to suddenly receiving hundreds of people a day. And so putting them up, and if you'll remember, in those early days, we had to close some rec centers in order to use their gyms for early shelter, because we just didn't know how many people were coming or where they were going to be going to. Central Park Rec Center, Rudy Park in my district, 20th Street Gym. These were chosen because they have pools, which means they have showers, which means at least you have the basic amenities for people who would be staying there overnight. And that's how the city operated in like very panicked emergency response for several months. We thought 2,000 was a lot of people to be sheltering. We reached 5,000 in this past December of active sheltering. But overall, just about 40,000 people have come through Denver. And let's see, this was as of February 12th. Yeah, we've supported 38,505 migrants and refugees. So we're operating 7 shelters. So these are, we call them non-congregate. They're motels or hotels. So they're non-congregate because they're individual rooms. And so we have 7 of those shelters, which are basically hotels. I've got one at 6th and Federal, which is a Comfort Inn Suites. And we're basically renting the whole thing out for the individuals that are staying with us. And we've got 3,300 people that are in shelter right now throughout the city. We also have 2 congregate shelters, so 2 kind of large room shelters that the city is also supporting for migrants. We are now working with the Archdiocese to provide bridge housing to families and children. Some of the support that we've received, 3.5 million received from the state, and a lot of that has gone to nonprofits that are providing some of the supportive services, some of the case management, some of the mental health care services, some of those that families just need. 1.6 million came from Homeland Security, and we've been approved for a federal reimbursement of $9 million. But the overall cost to the city, we've spent over $40 million in 2023. It has been a huge financial risk for us to be able to stay in these shelters and try to figure out, because we're actually trying to problem solve here what we do with all of these individuals now who they don't have immediate work authorization. The Department of Homeland Security allowed people who arrived until the end of July of last year the option to get a work visa. So those folks we're trying to work with to apply for those, but everyone that's arrived since that time doesn't have that same option. So we're trying to at least get them applied for asylum, which is a process you have to apply for, and then you wait for your case to be heard. They will be waiting years for those cases to be heard. And so one of the big advocacy pieces, particularly the mayor has taken on, is trying to get work authorization for all of those individuals, so they have an option. Miraculously, so many of these individuals are finding their way. They are partnering with each other. Should be no mystery to all of us. Undocumented immigrants find work, and they are connecting with each other. They're able to rent apartments. They're finding their way. Most of them that have come through Denver have actually moved on to other cities. Denver was not their destination. And so part of our responsibility too has been helping them get to those destinations. And so that's been around the country. But for those who stay in Denver, we've been trying to figure out, how do we help? How do we support? How do we make sure these folks don't become a new part of our homeless community in Denver as well? And the other facet that changed mid-year last year was that we had been seeing mostly single men come through from December to about end of May of last year. Suddenly we started seeing a lot of families and a lot of little kids. That was new for us and created an additional system of things that we needed to respond to. So obviously they then enroll in Denver public schools. They have different needs. How can we possibly turn away a family that has little babies and see them, living in a tent or having nowhere to go? And so it changed a lot of how we ended up responding and why we ended up with 7 hotels that we're renting right now until we can figure out other things, other better locations for these families. The I'll say the silver lining of it is my elementary schools are full. All of our elementary schools are full. And you know, DPS has been amazing because we haven't been able to tell them you can expect 25 8-year-olds in, you know, in the next several days. Like them being able to pivot and meet the needs of Spanish speaking children has been very difficult. But it's also created a lot of really amazing community moments in those schools. Garden Place, Valdez, Eagleton in my district. Let me pull up the chat here. I'll kind of stop there. I think a lot of what the city is trying to do now, we've got huge legal clinics that are being planned for next year. We put out the call for bilingual volunteers so that we can try to get as many people applied for asylum, for work visas if they qualify, variety of different things, and bringing as many lawyers and volunteers together as we can. So we'll be doing mass legal clinics this week, actually, this Thursday and Friday. So a lot of those things are how we're trying to respond. But right now, as the city faces, what do we do if we have this capacity moving forward, what that cost is going to look like? And, you know, my critique on how we've responded, one, I'm incredibly proud of how we've responded. It's been the most humane that I could have imagined for a city response to something like this. But two, it's not sustainable. Like it just isn't. We don't have unlimited dollars to carry this level of obligation, and so we will have to set certain parameters very soon. So the mayor's office will be instituting, or have instituted, a length of stay policy. So here's how long we will be able to shelter folks, and after that, we've got to be working with you, and you've got to be working on how are you trying to get to the next step. We're working with nonprofits. I've put out the call for churches in my district to help support and think about how their congregation can help families. And even if it's one family, how do we help that one family see some stability until they can get something arranged for themselves? So all of these things are happening. It's been incredible how many folks I've been able to see get into apartments, get jobs, get a work permit, get status. It's actually been pretty miraculous. But that's kind of where things are at right now. The budget cuts will be affecting, in its first wave, Parks and Recreation and the Department of Motor Vehicles. The mayor's working on a variety of different schedules and how we will be looking for savings in those departments. It won't be the only thing that the city is going to have to be looking at cutting or assessing as we move forward. So how long will the city house people arriving? I think the current length of stay has been 30 days for individuals and 60 days for families. But that could change if we are not able to continue funding at that level. I think that is subject to shorten if we're not able to keep families housed like that. I will say it's been a pretty amazing shift. We were sheltering 5,000 people in December, and we're down to 3,800 right now. So we've been able to at least reduce that obligation. That might be one shelter, two shelters that we've been able to take offline. So some of those have been really helpful for us. I do know that there are Facebook groups that have started for each of the locations, and people can join those groups and find out. People are bringing food, people are collecting donations, people are making direct relationships with families and saying, hey, this family needs this. I've seen things posted like, I've got a guy who's been offered work, he needs steel-toed boots, he needs a work belt, very specific things that are really tangible for folks who are trying to find a way to help, to kind of feel like they can make a difference for what's happening in their community. So those Facebook groups are are something that you can plug into right away. Even the city, like our call for volunteers, will probably be doing more of those in the future.
Wanda, did that
Yes.
answer your question that you put in chat?
One part of it. I put another one because my concern is that this level is really unsustainable for a city.
I agree.
And so we're getting 5,000 migrants, and I don't know whether it's whether it's in a week or a month time span, but it seems like it's a big obligation. And I know that the people in Denver have stepped up and done a lot of things, and I don't think people are saying they don't want to help. But to me, when when a city shelters a family, that family should stay there, regardless. If you come here and you don't want to be in Denver, you want to be in New York, then you need to make sure that your transportation takes you to New York. I don't want to sound insensitive, but what I'm saying is that we shelter them, put the resources in them. Then they say, oh, we don't want to be here. We want to go somewhere else. It seems to me when you come here, if I go to another country and I go there, wherever I land up at is where I'm going to make my home unless I have someplace to go originally. I just think that some asks are a little bit above the top. And I'm trying to be as sensitive as I can, but I really think that some are above. And I know that we have a lot of families out here in Montbello area. And that's the reason why I asked the question about the how long are they housed, because they have babies with them. It's like families. They're desperate. They're just trying to survive. But there are a lot of them here and they want work, but then they need a work permit to have work. And so it's really heartbreaking to see that. But I'm just saying that I just think that there has to be a way where you say this is where you are, and we're gonna make do with where you are. We're gonna try to make things work. And then what are we doing for our people, our homeless people? There are a lot of homeless people here. We need to put resources into those people as well, because they're here, and some of them, and that's where I hear a lot of the comments made from other people, is that we have people here that we're not taking care of. So how can we take care of people who are coming from another place? Not that
No, I think it's fair.
but I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing from others.
It's fair. What I will say is that our budget for homelessness resolution has largely, like, since Mayor Johnston came in, he put a lot of effort into this House 1,000 initiative, which purchased or leased hotels, particularly for people who had been living on the street. And that was our local homeless population. So we are trying to walk the two gun at the same time when it comes to both these housing crises as they affect our entire community. What I will say about migrants is they don't choose initially to come to get to Denver. Governor Abbott puts them on a bus to Denver. He says it's easier for him to be able to do that. And once they get here, we have to then figure out, oh, Denver wasn't where you wanted to be at all. I remember meeting some folks who had an appointment back in El Paso and they were sent to Denver. It was insane to me that somebody had just traveled on a bus only for us to send them back to Texas. They should have never been on that bus in the first place. And so those kinds of decisions that are made on the Texas side are not things that we're really aware of. How are they arriving at that decision? They're just putting people on buses and sending them wherever. And it's something that Chicago and New York have also faced kind of more numbers, but per capita, we've seen more people. So for our population, we've definitely received the most migrants from Texas. And again, this is not coordinated, right? We're not told beforehand who's coming or how many are coming. So the pressure for the federal government to act, because we can't issue a work visa, right? Where I do credit Mayor Johnston is he's trying to think really creatively about the ways that we can help folks get into work. And there's actually an apprenticeship option that opens up the ability for somebody without status to be able to find work. And so creating apprenticeship programs is something that the city is now looking at doing. Like, when we're backed into a corner is when, we really try to figure out what are the multitude of ways that we could be addressing this differently, particularly when we have no control over immigration levers. All we can control is kind of what are we allowed to do within our purview or within the state purview. So all of those things we're trying to make that happen right now. But I would say we are actually trying to do quite a bit for our local homeless population. And it's the visible homeless, to be clear. When my family was homeless, we were sheltered with another family. And so that doubled up family experience or even tripled up family experience is less visible in Denver. And it's one of the ways that we're trying to make sure there are other options for folks to consider for affordable housing. And one of the reasons it's so important to me in my district to be able to have every housing option along a spectrum, everything from permanent supportive housing to 30 to 60% area median income housing to market rate that somebody wants to build. I can't afford a duplex side that's $800,000. But I want to make sure that the affordable housing unit that's getting built has units for teachers and city workers and families that are trying to find something on a single person's income. So we're trying to do all of the things at the same time.
It's not related to what we've just been talking about, migrant issues, but there was a previous question in chat from Peg, who asked, what do you think are the pros and cons of rent control? I lived in New York City for quite a while, and Colorado has not been a renter's paradise, shall I say. There are other cities and states that are much more used to the majority of people renting and not being homeowners. And so in New York, we had rent control. What do you think about that as something we might pursue here in Colorado or in Denver?
Yeah, I support, and here we call it a rent stabilization conversation. So we're not permitted as a municipality to even begin a policy conversation about rental stabilization without the state letting us passing a bill saying that we can, because we can't pass a local rent stabilization law or even begin to have the conversation until they do that. And it hasn't passed yet. I know that it was introduced last year, and it didn't have the governor's support. I think pros and cons. There are probably others that know much more deeply about why they believe it's not a successful tactic, and it has a lot to do with how they feel like the market needs to respond to price pressures, and that it creates limits that stifle development. And I think universally we want to make sure that units continue to get built. I favor it because I've seen how rent increases have been misused and just exorbitantly applied. Renters who face 300% increases, increases that come multiple times a year, variety of things that happen that make the ability to keep the home that you have really difficult. And so what I would like is for Denver to be able to have the conversation of what could it look like in Denver, how could it be implemented, like what are the variety of ways so that we can learn how to improve on how rent control systems either worked or failed in other cities, and try to improve on that. But we won't be able to do that until the state gives us kind of some runway to be able to start that conversation. But I would like to be able to at least have that conversation here in Denver.
Thanks. You mentioned earlier that
Sure.
you wanted to talk about some other legislative proposals or bills.
Yeah, we are following a number of things at the state. What was the really large land use bill last year has now been broken up into multiple bills. And folks are running just an ADU bill, just a transit-oriented development bill, residency occupancy limits, so not allowing municipalities to set limits on how many unrelated people can live in a home. Denver did that. It's called group living zoning changes, which allows up to 5 unrelated people that could live in a home. I think the state's doing it by square footage, so many people per square footage that you've got. There's a bill around senior housing income tax credit. I believe increasing that. Let me see. Oh, construction defects. I know that there are still going to be folks who are going to try to address something called construction defects. And I generally support addressing our construction defects issue. Obviously, I don't want people to build things that are poorly built. But I think the pendulum has swung too far in one direction that developers can't get insured for the developed condos because of what's in this current language. So I am hoping they start to try to address that, to try to peel back some of the layers of why this is so complicated, because what's resulting in is a lack of condos being built anywhere in the city. And so these are your home ownership options that can be your first step into home ownership. And we simply we have not been seeing condos built in Denver for years and years. And that's pulling a home ownership option completely off the table for us. So I do hope that they're able to address something like that. Some legislation, not housing related, but two that I want to just share with you all. I'm going to be working on a charter change. So the city's charter is like our constitution. And anything that we change in the city charter has to go to voters to approve. We have a lot of language in there that says how we hire and recruit police officers and firefighters. And one of the longstanding requirements that we've had in there is that you have to be a U.S. citizen to become a firefighter or a police officer. And I want to remove that and allow anybody who's eligible to work, who otherwise qualifies to be a police officer or firefighter, to be able to apply to be in Denver's police and fire forces. This is something that the sheriff's department in Denver has already fixed, because they don't live in our charter. They live in ordinance and just in our municipal code. And they were sued because an immigrant felt like they experienced employment discrimination when the sheriff's department originally had the same language. And the Department of Justice ruled that Denver was in violation of employment discrimination. And so the sheriff's department had to lift that language. I would like police and fire to also do the same. We wouldn't be the only municipality, even in Colorado, that allows legal permanent residents and DACA recipients to join police and fire ranks. And so, and obviously we allow them to serve in our military. So it's one of the things that I'd like to see change in our charter. One of the big things that I'm most proud of passing while I've been in Denver City Council has been our municipal wage theft law, which we passed last year in January, which gave the Denver auditor, through his division of Denver Labor, the authority to review wage theft complaints. And this is kind of the bookend that I think about when I think about whether or not a family is able to afford to stay living in Denver, as not just can they find an affordable housing unit, but can they keep the money that they earn from their job, and is that increasing as well? Do they have those like income streams that are helping to support their family? And wage theft affects most every labor kind of sector, but largely construction, hospitality, home care, kinship care, nannying. That's where we see a lot of the wage theft complaints come through. And we passed a pretty progressive and strong wage theft bill in Denver that now the state is trying to replicate, and they may be facing some difficulty in doing that. What I'd like to attach to that work is a co-enforcement model that partners with a nonprofit to be making sure that folks know what Denver protects, what wage theft looks like, because it isn't just you worked a week and you only got paid for 2 days. It could also look like somebody not paying you for overtime, or not giving you breaks. A variety of different things constitute wage theft legally. So making sure that we're protecting workers and being able to bring home every dollar that they earn. So that's another piece that I look at for our kind of working family stability efforts.
You'll be glad to know that our kickoff speaker last fall was the city auditor. And we did have a presentation about that program that we have here in Denver County that isn't available in other counties in our state. And we also had somebody come talk about human trafficking, and human trafficking and wage theft often go hand in hand. So the league has been looking at both those issues, and we absolutely agree with you. We have one more question in the chat. Well, we have two more, but the first one is from Carol. Where have the persons bused to Colorado been from? In pursuing asylum, what are the types of persecution: race, religion, political opinion, nationality, or membership in a particular social group that have been reasons? Does the city ever really know this? Might some of those seeking might some of those seeking the border quote better life? If so, what percentage? Do we know about that?
I don't know that we do. So this will be the first legal clinic that we've been holding starting on Thursday, helping people file their asylum applications. If they've filed them, it may be through some of our partners. So I don't know specifically how they've discussed exactly what their persecution has been. The people bused to Colorado have largely been from Venezuela. And that's predominantly who we are sheltering right now. I actually haven't seen too many other nationalities represented in our system. Now, I do know that other individuals are arriving in Denver, not through the Texas governor's buses to Denver. Hope Communities, for example, has seen a lot of Mauritanians arriving in Denver. They're trying to support through their organization. So it isn't just kind of a single source, though that may be who the city and county of Denver government might be seeing exclusively. And so I couldn't speak to that. I might be able to know more about that maybe in another month or two, once we start to see some of the legal clinics kind of play out, and maybe even chat with some immigration attorneys on what they're seeing.
Okay. Another question in chat from Cindy. Has the Denver rental licensing program been effective in increasing the maintenance and livability, and I would add safety, of rental properties?
I do believe so. We just, I think, did a most recent push to make sure that rental properties were signing up for the licensure and getting the inspections that they needed. We've also been open to making sure that it isn't that we didn't kind of miss the mark on things, that it hasn't been onerous, or that those inspections have costed more than we estimated when we established the bill. But this is this is exactly, I think, what we want to make sure we're able to stay on top of. But I still get a lot of calls from folks, and they're not all in private homes, but that still have no heat, that haven't had hot water in many weeks. Just a variety of issues on habitability that still do arise. But at least we're able to use the tool as folks feel more comfortable reporting those issues, whether it's to 311 or to their council person. I'd certainly see those questions start to come up, and it helps us make sure that we're able to follow up with that property owner. But I could probably get a more concrete answer on both the number of a percentage of properties that are coming into compliance, and maybe some of those stories about how it's helped.
Thank you. Cindy's our prolific question provider. She also asks, is there any help with eviction rates? Legal help, educational help, to help. We've had a huge increase in evictions. And what are the organizations that are helping with that? Rental rights or unfair practices, are those being corrected so that people are not evicted for reasons other than simple non-payment of their rent?
So there is a just cause eviction bill that's coming through the state right now. I know Javier Mabry, he may be somebody that you want to bring in to kind of talk about, because he's also a housing attorney with the Economic Defense Project of Colorado. And they're one of the vendors that the city funds to provide eviction defense. So the city, yeah.
And my other hat is on the executive committee of the Colorado Social Legislation Committee, and we did have Javier Mabry come. So you could go to the CSLC website, because those presentations every Monday are taped, and you can hear about that eviction legislation that is being supported, and that's in statewide.
Love that. I know when Just Cause failed in last year's session, I did look to see whether or not Denver independently could pass its own, and we cannot. So we're also hoping that at the state level, they have more success with that this year. And so tracking that one closely as well.
It's so interesting, the things that you want to do here in the city that you're hampered from doing because they have to be done statewide. And we often hear about not just the urban rural kind of tension that we have here in the state of Colorado, or the western slope versus eastern slope tension, but also that municipalities, and Denver being the largest one in the state, are prevented from doing some of the things they might want to do because the state is not taking action on those things. Very
That's
interesting.
exactly right. It's been interesting to learn from my seat as well.
Yeah. Other questions? We're about at 7 o'clock, and this has been just a wonderful presentation, Councilperson Torres. Thank you so much. I think you've given us a huge amount to think of. I took lots of notes. I am always a prolific note taker, but I think you've given us a lot of things to think about, and things for the League of Women Voters locally to take action about. So we really appreciate your joining us this evening. Thank
you for the invitation.
Oh, we thank you. Any other questions, comments? Anybody can unmute and okay.
And I
Well,
put my email in the chat there, so if you needed any follow-up, feel free.
thank you so much. And thank you all attendees for being avid listeners and question askers. Take care, and remember that next month our briefing will start at 5 o'clock instead of 5:30, and we will be discussing issues around healthcare and a possibility of universal healthcare in the United States. Thanks again. Take care.
Thanks, Jamie.
Bye-bye.